We can all learn things. It would be absurd to think that after thousands of years of human beings thinking about the situations that we have, that we would find nothing beneficial in religion. That's asinine. But of course we do. Nobody would propose that religion managed, or any religion managed to get everything wrong except maybe Scientology. If you consider a world where there were no secular moral systems, a world where we simply had competing religious claims, all citing their own supreme authority or their own particular deity, their own sacred text or great thinker, how do we settle disputes? There is no reasoning in that system. It is all conquest. It is all conversion. It is all coercion. This is my house, young man, and as long as you're under it, you will do what I say, and you will worship our God, and you will do this. It is all indoctrination. There is no enlightenment in this fantasy picture. Fortunately, we don't live in that world. And oddly enough, neither do most of the religious people. For some reason, I'm not advancing to the next slide. So, the last criteria that I was going to compare, and it'll continue the trend. So, secular systems are more complex. And they're more complex because they've been allowed to evolve and mature. Because they've been modified to adapt to situations in the past, there are, relatively speaking, fewer, quote-unquote, new situations for them to deal with. Now, I don't want anybody to think that I've gone off the deep end. Of course, there are always new situations. But the thing is, the more situations you've dealt with, the larger your pool is with which to compare all the other situations. So there are fewer and fewer big, unresolved surprises. We're building up wealth of knowledge, standing on the shoulders of giants, as I mentioned before. Additionally, we're able to spend more energy focusing on the new situations that don't clearly fit into previously sets of values, rather than continually treading water, trying to solve the same problems over and over again. How many times do we need to have this creation versus evolution fight take place in school? It's not a moral thing, but it's the first example that leaps to mind about how religions tend to tread water. And they keep battling the same issue over and over and over again because they're butting heads with a secular progressive moral system or a secular progressive science system or anything else that conflicts with their rigid structure. They're less flexible, they're immutable to resistance, they're immutable and resistant to change. And non-secular systems tend to remain simplistic, and to the extent that they do change, they tend to trail behind their secular counterparts. Look at the United States Criminal Code regarding the killing of another person. This is a robust example of an evolving, thoughtful process of revision. Instead of something simplistic, as we would see in a rigid system like thou shalt not kill, we have something complex in a very flexible system. If I run over you with my car, is it murder? What degree of murder? Is it felony murder? Is it manslaughter? Was it accidental? Was it negligent homicide? Maybe it's suicide. We live in a world that recognizes that thou shalt not kill didn't tell us much. Actually, it didn't tell us anything. Anybody who wasn't already aware that killing is generally a bad thing, by the time those commandments got hammered out, they were probably a lost cause. I mean, maybe I'm being a little anachronistic, but generally I think that it could have been a little more detailed than that, especially if you're getting your information from an all-knowing ruler of the universe. So we recognize that motive and intent are relevant in assessing moral character of an act. Imagine that you have two children, and I've used this example before, so some of you heard it, and they misbehave when you take them out in public. And over the course of a year, you get to a point where both of them will behave in public. Their actions are now similar. They're both good kids in your house. If one of them behaves because they have a proper understanding of sharing space in a cooperative society and an actual desire to make that society as positive for all the participants as possible, and the other behaves simply because he's been threatened with punishment or promised a reward, which is the better child? I would hope that almost everybody would say that the motive and intent is valuable. And the kid who is being good because he understands the benefits of being good, the value of being good, even for its own sake, is the one that actually has a better moral character. I mean, we can teach a dog not to do things by giving it treats and rewards. As a matter of fact, there are sometimes that just saying, giving your dog a hug is enough of a reward. And then they can appreciate that doing the right thing is its own reward. So, not only does the motivation matter in that particular situation, but that motivation is the foundation of 1,000 other moral decisions. What happens to that other child when the carrot and stick are removed, when mommy and daddy are no longer around? What sort of contributions will they make to a cooperative society if they never truly learn the nature of actions, consequences, boundaries, and freedoms? We recognize that being good for goodness sake is superiority. The absence of a complete and clearly defined standard is not the equivalent of having no values and no way to construct a standard. That's a lot to say. It's one of the things that I wanted to harp on the most. And so I'll touch on this for a couple of minutes. The most common objections I hear to secular morality are based on the flawed argument that an absence of a clearly defined best strategy is the equivalent of having no strategy at all, or that the dissent of any individual with respect to the best strategy necessarily undermines the significance or consensus of others. This simply isn't true. You may be able to find someone who sincerely thinks that it would be moral to exterminate every lawyer, but that doesn't change the fact that we can clearly identify that it's wrong and why it's wrong. All opinions are not of similar significance. This is the part of the talk that tends to either win support or get people's heads shaken. Because I'm automatically saying there are people that you don't have to listen to when it comes to these issues, which is going to seem a little confusing, but I'll do what I can to get through this. Those who, for example, want to kill all the lawyers are entitled to their opinion. They're entitled to share their opinion. But we're not in any way obligated to give their opinions any weight when we're constructing our moral system. In part, because it's our moral system. And also because we already know that this action leads to results which are contrary to the goals of a healthy and productive society. We already know that it's a bad move, or at least my lawyer says it's bad. Consider, for example, the legal movement of a knight on a chessboard. We're back to chess again. Hopefully somebody here plays chess. This is just all for me. If you ask one player to describe the movement of a knight on a chessboard, he might say the knight moves orthogonally 1 square and diagonally 1 square. Another player might describe it as the knight moves orthogonally 2 squares and then to an adjacent orthogonal square on a different path than the original trajectory. That's not the guy you want to date. Somebody else may just say up 2 over 1, up 1 over 2. There's lots of different similar ways to describe that simple action. They're all correct, and there's no problem with the description because the net effects are the same. But what if you ask 2 players, given a specific chess position, what is the best move and what is the worst move? For some positions, the answers are clear and obvious. This may not make sense to the non-chess players, but think about it, back in the I'm going to give you a gift or I'm going to steal your car. There are chess moves that are that good or that dumb. But not all of them are that way. There may be a single move that guarantees a win or a loss or a draw. But for other positions, the answer is not so obvious, and there may in fact be several winning moves or losing moves. The presence of several possible right answers doesn't mean that we should forfeit the game. The fact that we haven't found a single best answer does not mean we toss up our hands and say we've lost. We have no strategy. We can do nothing here. We've identified moves that are better and moves that are worse. We've identified some moves that are more likely to win us the game. And we may on occasion make mistakes. But to try to claim that without some kind of consensus, you can't have any kind of moral position, that you have no strategy, that it's anarchy without some absolute being handed down from on high, is insane. And it is part of the lie that just drives me crazy. Additionally, the fact that someone in a group keeps pointing to a clearly losing move and calling it a winning move doesn't matter. Those are the people that I'm saying you can disregard. If we've identified that a move is obviously losing, if we've identified that killing another person just because they spit on your face is a bad moral action, anybody who says that it's okay to do that can be disregarded. We've settled that problem. We've solved it. We're not saying that their opinion is no longer valid in a broad broad realm of ideas. We're talking about with respect to this specific situation, you no longer matter if you're going to keep holding that position until you do one of a couple different things. One is to demonstrate why your position is correct, is moral, has a benefit, does something productive for society. So when I talk about, a minute ago, the fact that secular morality is a natural evolving process, what do I mean? It means from very simple beginnings, we're able to construct a complex, robust, dynamic moral system. And what simple beginnings do we tend to work with? McDonald's. Life is generally preferable to death. Pleasure is generally preferable to pain. Benefit is generally preferable to harm. And we can begin building. Now, there are exceptions to each of those, usually when those are in conflict. There are a number of other possible core values that you can begin with when you talk about bettering society, but we can begin with this. It may be the case that death may be preferable to life when continuing that life causes pain or harm, or when it saves a life considered more valuable by the individual. We live in a complicated world, and even those basic values are going to conflict and place us in a position of waiting. As our understanding increases, we build a pool of situations to consider, and some complicate the landscape initially, and some clarify other decisions. One big advantage of secular moral systems is that the old rules can be updated with new rules. By contrast, non-secular moral systems, as we've already talked about, are typically restricted in their ability to evolve and evolve. I'm not advocating specific moral positions when I use these as examples, although I think you'd be hard-pressed to find too many people who would disagree with these as kind of general guidelines, along with things like individual freedom, the ability of each and every person to satisfy their own desires within the limits of a cooperative society, recognizing that my freedoms and rights end where somebody else's start. But we can build off what we've learned. We can take the greatest thoughts from wherever they find them, whether it's in a religion or in a secular line of thought, and we can get rid of the baggage and the garbage. That's the other negative aspect of non-secular morality, is they don't have a good mechanism for getting rid of the garbage, which is why you have the Catholic Church, and this isn't a moral issue either, but it's about doctrine, getting rid of limbo, eventually. Making apologies to Galileo 400 years afterwards, that type of thing. There's no quick and easy mechanism for them. And by the way, in a secular system, it's not necessarily always quick and easy either. But there is a mechanism there, and it's data-driven. As I've noted elsewhere, we've got the ability to assess actions and the results with respect to goals. Outliers can be safely regarded until they demonstrate the efficacy of their values. It doesn't make us closed-minded to dismiss the KKK's views on human rights. If anything, it makes us responsible. In situations where we cannot properly evaluate an action to determine its moral values, we fall back to the foundational values of the system. One of the primary is that the fundamental freedom of the individual is paramount. There are two ways of looking at rights. Either we have only the rights that we explicitly enumerate, or we have every right except for the ones we specifically restrict. The former throttles liberty and mires us in bureaucracy and fascism. The latter exalts liberty and allows us to avoid anarchy. But wait a minute, by what right do you dismiss the KKK's views on human rights? By the same criteria that I disregard anything else. It's not simply a matter of, I don't like your bigotry, go away, which could be fine. You're just trying to shorthand it and you don't feel like actually debating it. It's, you haven't demonstrated that your views contribute to the betterment of society in any recognizable way. You haven't demonstrated that your core values represent an improvement. And I have evidence that demonstrates that what you're pushing is not the type of society that we want. And that's the extent of being able to eliminate these outliers of issues that we've resolved and get on with it. Back to number. So what kind of world do you want to live in? Most people tend to object to the government making and imposing laws on what you can do in the privacy of your own home. Not everybody, but most people. Yet that's the same sort of externally imposed system that non-secular moral systems tend to be. what kind of world do we want to live